wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Today on the Sunday Stoic podcast, we are rejoined by Dr. Kevin Vost. Dr. Vost is an author of, I believe, over a dozen books. I'd like to talk to him about how he pulls that off. A speaker, teacher, radio and television guest, bodybuilder, and much more. Dr. Vost, welcome back to the Sunday Stoic podcast. Is there anything else about your background that you'd like us to know? Because you have quite a resume.
Well, hey, it's always a pleasure being with you, Steve. And yeah, I have been writing a lot of books. And I can tell you briefly, it helps that I've been retired from full-time employment and part-time college teaching since 2016. So that helps. And I believe right now I've had 23 books out, and I think 5 more are in different stages.
Wow.
Well, this our strange world the last couple of years kind of kept me at home and had some publishers ask me to do things. But I've sworn to my wife after this year, no more than one a year. And I'm only going to have a winter writing season. So we'll see how that goes. So
soon we'll be able to say dozens of books.
Yeah.
That'll sound great. Yeah. So how do you do that? How do you have a lot of ideas that then you just pick a couple and begin researching or writing? What's your process like?
Most of the books I come up with the ideas. So topics I've been studying oftentimes for years and years, like these memory books. I specialized in that in my psychology. I do some books that involve strength training, physical fitness, one of my other areas of background. Of course, I've been a fan of the Stoics, but occasionally I'll get to ask to write about a topic. Like I was asked to write about a book on loneliness for a Catholic publisher a few years back.
Wow.
Just because of my psychological background.
Sure.
And asked, do you want about scrupulosity, where people feel overly guilty and worried about things? That one's in the works. So they're usually my ideas, but sometimes a publisher will ask me. And just the general scheme is, it usually takes me about 3 months working in the mornings to write a first draft of a book that's maybe 200, 250 pages.
Oh, wow.
Then it goes to the publisher, and they're usually out within 1 year. But I did write a book that's going to come out this summer. It's a faith and fitness book. It'll be called You Are That Temple. And that was my record. I wrote the rough draft of that thing in 23 days because I was just so pumped up about it. But usually it takes a few months. And again, I'm retired now, so I don't really have too many other commitments.
Understandable. But yeah, that's amazing. I would just like to figure out, I want to do one book, but I have no idea what it would be. Or I can't get that, I have it. Here's what I need to pursue. I can't think of the perfect topic. There's so many books about just Stoicism that you need a take on it. Like your book that we're about to talk about is a very specialized text, but I think a very important one. And so I like that. It's not just how to be a Stoic. It's there are hundreds of those, but it's something very specific. And so we'll get to that in here in a second. So the book actually, when did it release? It's out now, correct?
Yeah, it came out in March from Angelico Press, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all kinds of online booksellers.
And I'm holding it here. It's Memorize the Stoics, the ancient art of memory meets the timeless art of living. And I have already put it to use. I believe I tried to show it off to my wife to prove it. I believe I have committed to memory now the themes of all of the Enchiridion. And so, So I have not progressed into Seneca yet, but I just focused on the Enchiridion to see how your method works. And of course, it's not your method exactly, but it's something that you are reintroducing the world to that's often been somewhat forgotten and neglected. A technique that seems to be very powerful. If someone like me can do it, I think it can might make. I work all the time with students who can't seem to remember enough information to get through an exam. I could imagine it being helpful for them, for people who give speeches, for people who need to memorize a list of tasks, a grocery list even. I bet it could be useful. It's
absolutely.
So let's talk about this technique. Let's back up, I guess, just first of all, to the art of memory. How did you get interested in this ability we all have, but we seem to neglect and rely on our phones for more and more these days? How did you get interested in becoming an expert at memory?
Well, one thing, it probably helps being an old guy over 60, because I don't think I had I didn't carry a phone with me until I was in my 40s, mid 40s. But actually, I was always kind of a bookworm. My father-in-law called people like me noodles. And so I was always interested in reading things. And in the late 1970s, I'm here in Springfield, Illinois, and just about everything in this town is named after Abraham Lincoln, because it was his hometown when he was president. So the Lincoln Library had their annual book sale. People contribute books, or they just get rid of old books people don't read anymore. And I was there one time, and I this book called Your Memory, Speedway to Success in Earning, Learning, and Living, featuring the Auto Magic Method by O.W. Bill Hayes. And it was written in 1958. By about 1978, nobody was reading it anymore, so the library's getting rid of it. So I tell people that was the most profitable quarter I ever invested, because I laid out a quarter. I got that little memory book, and it was very, very simple. It didn't really give you the history of this. There's no scientific studies, nothing like that, but just said how you use it, a very simple method. And it was a location method that we'll probably give some details on later, but it's based on just 20 parts of a car. You memorize the hood ornament. People used to have those before they got in the habit of taking them for souvenirs,
Right.
You got to work your way around the car. So anyway, I found it was super helpful for me. So, when I went to college, anytime I had to memorize material, boom, that was a snap. Even by the time I went through my doctoral program, when I took the examination for professional psychology, this big national exam, I was able to set the highest score in the state that year and set my school's all-time record by supplementing my normal study, with these methods. I didn't use only these methods, but it was an icing on the cake that made a real difference. So by the time, and earlier than that, I did a master's thesis. I was so interested in this stuff. I surveyed the psychological and educational literature where they taught people of various ages how to use techniques like this to learn schoolwork, to learn, facts of biology, or to learn foreign language or even English language vocabulary they didn't know yet. And it tended to be very, very powerful. Like sometimes first and second graders who were taught this would outperform fifth and sixth graders who weren't. Or junior high school students who were taught the method would outperform high school, junior, and seniors who weren't, So I just, found it very, very useful. And as I did that psychological research, I dug into the history of these methods. And I discovered that they go back about 2,500 years to this Greek Simonides. It was passed down to the West through Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero, 1st century BC. And he's kind of a fascinating character because he plays similar roles with the memory method and with Stoicism.
Right.
Because the memory method comes down to, there's a book they used to attribute to him called the Ad Herennium, just to this guy named Herennius. It's about rhetorical public speaking. It's from the 80s BC. And for centuries, people thought Cicero wrote it, but we don't think so now. But it matches up with another book he did, De Invention, or On Invention on Public Speaking, where he does specifically talk about this. So anyway, Cicero passed that on to the West. Early Christian figures, St. Jerome, St. Augustine, they knew about this stuff. By the time you get to the 13th century, you have these very profound scholars, St. Albert the Great, who was like an early scientist, and St. Thomas Aquinas, a great philosopher. They latched on to these Latin memory method books, studied them, with a fine-tooth comb, and they also integrated it with a body of literature that came from Aristotle on just how the human memory works. So they said, here's this literature on how we remember things. Here's this literature on how we improve memory. And they say, look at how they mesh together, and they give us some practical suggestions on how to actually use it.
So you're able to draw from all of that and put it to use in the 20th and 21st century. That's pretty nice.
Absolutely. And sometimes people will say, well, why should I remember anything? Yeah, because I got this cell phone, it knows everything,
right.
But sometimes I'll give an example. I'll say, well, let's say you had to have some kind of surgery. And who would you rather have operate on you? The world's most magnificent IT guy. He's in a room full of supercomputers, or your average surgeon down at the hospital down the street. Well, the IT guy has the entire world of medicine at his fingertips, right? But that surgeon has a less amount of medicine, but it's the relevant stuff. And it's actually in his fingertips and in his mind, So there are some things that are actually worth having in your head. And with these Stoic ideas, they're to guide us in some difficult life situations sometimes. You have some loss, you have some injury, you're insulted. to have some of their ideas in your mind so you can pull them out. Okay, here's how I'm going to face this situation. It can be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I believe you mentioned, I forget, I didn't memorize this, but in your work you mentioned how many times Epictetus at least insinuates that we should memorize these principles. And I assume that a lot of I think going back in time, let's say you're in 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, I bet paper was a lot harder to come by, and you might only get to see a book once, or a papyrus before they put it away. So being able to commit things to memory might be the only way you'd carry it off with you, and then when you want to reference it during a challenging situation, you need to pull it out of your head. You need to, I remember I need wherever I find a challenge, I have the fortitude to deal with it. I have the power, as you say in your book, He-Man. We'll get there. The reference that will make sense in a few minutes, I hope. but you have the ability to cope with whatever happens if you can recall your principles when you need them. I find I fail a lot more when things happen so fast that I don't have time to reflect on what my principles are, and I just act. And having things in my memory readily at hand increase the odds that I will act the way I want to when a situation comes up. And I found your book to be very approachable, and I don't know what it is. This might be kind of Epicurean of me, some of the high pleasures of Epicureanism, but I find, even though sometimes I'm tired and I don't want to, but I find doing the work like your book introduces us to, I find it pleasurable in some way. Maybe it's a rewarding feeling, like, we don't use this mental muscle as much as we used to. And when you start to work it and then see the results, it's kind of powerful in a way.
Well, I appreciate that. And one of the lessons of the Stoics, of course, that Epictetus starts from his very first lesson is, we distinguish what's in our control and what's not in our control.
Sure.
And the most important things in our control, our judgments, our will, our ability to guide our lives. But some people might not realize the extent that their memory powers actually are in our control. I mean, some people say, I have a bad memory, or, oh yeah, I have a good memory. But memory's not just something you have. It's a skill. It can be built. It can be trained. So, and in just a little Enchiridion, the manual or handbook of Epictetus, just this, the summary of his wonderful discourses that go on and on and on. There's just 53 tiny little chapters in there, paragraphs. Some are even just a sentence. But yeah, I counted, he says, either remember or keep in mind at least a dozen times, just in those couple of dozen pages there. So it is important to be able to do that. And as maybe we'll make clear too, like when you said, you memorize the concepts of the Enchiridion, now there's 53 chapters, so 53 key ideas. We're not memorizing it verbatim, like, here, I'm going to read the Enchiridion from my head, And there's an old line in the Christian world from St. Augustine. He said, if I'm going to meet a person and try to convert them to Christianity, he goes, I'm not going to say, here, sit down, and then say, start reading the Bible to them. There was a great chaos and the wind came over the water. He says, no. I'm going to tell them some key concepts and then let them go read the details. So what we're doing with this memory method, like for the manual or the Enchiridion, the handbook, we're just going to try to memorize to begin with one key fundamental concept or idea from each one of those 53 chapters. And then as we think about it, we put it in our own words, So if you're going to describe it to somebody, you don't have to worry, am I using the exact phraseology of Epictetus as it was translated? And there's all kinds of translations, right? So the idea, and the ancient people called this memory for things as opposed for memory for words. So the memory for words might be like parroting something back. The memory for things is like, it tries to get at Epictetus's idea. He said, if a sheep wanted to please its master, it wouldn't just vomit up the grass it ate. Look at all the grass it ate. Here it comes, It's going to turn that grass into wool. So that's the idea here. We're going to try to memorize some key concepts so we can ruminate, think about them and then have some results in our life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So this would be a way, if you had for example, a speech to give, but you weren't going to memorize every word of the speech, but you have themes, you could use this technique to keep yourself on track while you're speaking in public, for example. Now, there may be a different method if you needed to memorize something verbatim, but I think this technique can be used to get you started memorizing something verbatim. your last few chapters kind of talk about.
Yeah, I give some
that
hints there.
process.
It can be used to help supplement it. At times I've done, but like for talks, when I give live talks, I don't use notes because I go through this memory house. In fact, coming up this Tuesday, my diocese asked me to give these little like 5-minute talks on the gifts of the Holy Spirit, they're called. They come from the book of Isaiah. And I've already filmed 2, but I need to do 5 of these in a row without any notes, just verbatim next Tuesday. So I have laid out, I think, 31 key points as I go through this like memory house that we might tap into. So in the book, I use it for Epictetus, this memory house.
Sure.
And then I go through and use it again for Synagogue. So you can use it for virtually anything, but I will say, you can get in a state of what they call interference. If you try to have too many things going at once, you're not going to be completely sharp with all those bodies of knowledge at the same time. So the ones you've been repeating lately or have reviewed will be the most firmly in your mind.
So do you use, well, let's just start here. This method, what do I want to say? It's known as the loci method or the loci method. What do you call this method? What is your term for it?
Yeah. I also often do call it the method of loci or loci for locations. And even though the Simonides, the Greek invented it, they use the word topoi for places, which we actually also use. The word topic comes for that, so it kind of ties into that. But yeah, it goes back to this ancient method where you visualize in your head just a series of locations. Well, I'll give you later in the words of Thomas Aquinas. He said 4 key elements to this method. 2 of them we already know. One is rehearsal or repetition. If you want to memorize something, you're not going to, unless you're some kind of a photographic memory, which very, very few of us are, you're not going to do it by just one memorization.
Sure.
And I will say they've even done studies where they had people who are experts in these methods, and they pit them against people with near photographic memories. And these memory masters with the strategy tend to win. I mean, it's very, very powerful. Now, if you already have a supernaturally powerful memory and you lay these on top of them,
watch out.
Wow, yeah. But anyway, repetition. The old Latin people used to say repetitio et mater memoriae. Repetition's the mother of memory, right? So we know that. We also know you have to concentrate, you have to focus and pay attention. So you do with these methods too. But here's the 2 unique features. One is you need to have imagery, use mental imagery. Even for what Thomas Aquinas calls spiritual or abstract concepts, picture it in a way you can actually picture it, make it concrete, make it physical. And also, if you really want to remember it, make it somehow exaggerated or wild or crazy or silly. So take that concept, because all this image is going to do is trigger the real concept.
Right.
So the image can be silly and goofy, but it's triggering in your mind something that's not. Something is very
sure. Yeah. You want something cartoonish almost.
That's right. So we have repetition and concentration. Then we have these images, and then that other component, the loci, the location, is you need an orderly arrangement. You need to know what comes in what order if you're memorizing things that are in a sequence. So that's where, in this particular method, I use parts of a room of a house. And that oldest book we have in Latin, the Ad Herennium, the first example it gives is using a house. And we're all familiar with our houses. They look a little different today than they did probably in the 1st century BC in Rome, but the general concept's the same. Yeah, you got a front door, you got the different living spaces and so on. So that's the gist of these 4 things. We use images, we put them in a special location, we try to concentrate hard while we're doing it, and we rehearse it. And sometimes we might even rehearse it backwards so we can make sure we have the exact order. Or we'll do it like at random, call out certain numbers, boom, 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 make sure you got them where they are.
I haven't got to that point. I did try it backwards. I think succeed at that. But it took me longer. It's like trying to do the alphabet backwards. It takes me a while, but
it does. And I will say too, Steve, in the material we're using, I mean, sometimes I've done it for material that just like the virtues or something, just one word. And that's easier. That's easier. Boom, boom, boom. You picture a fort for fortitude, I did, things like that. We're doing concepts, so it's a little bit more difficult. But as you've shown, it still can work. It still can be mastered.
Now, how often would you suggest someone rehearse this if they want this to be something they have readily at hand for a long period of time?
Yeah. Now, that's going to be a matter of individual differences. Our memory powers vary quite a bit. But I would say, let's say you've actually memorized the 53 key concepts in the Enchiridion, knowing exactly what Epictetus is talking about where. So if you want to retain that, I'd say probably at first, like right now, if this is fresh, every couple of days or so, go through it. And then as time goes on, you can spread out, you can spread it out more and more. And another way to test yourself, you're going back and you're reading the handbook itself, or you're reading another modern author who's talking about it. They bring up a certain concept, test yourself. Oh, they talked about prohoresis. Well, I know Epictetus talks about that in his 9th chapter of the Enchiridion, because there's, the image that we use there. So things like that. So there's different ways you can test yourself. If you love the Stoics and you plan on reading them throughout your life, your reading can help you reinforce this memory mastery.
And you can add to your, let's just call it memory palace or whatever your term is. You can add details to the images in your head to add more to what you can remember. You can well, maybe we can do an example here in a minute of what that might look like. But one other question I had, you kind of hinted at this. Let's say you use your own home as your loci, your location, and you're memorizing Epictetus and the order anyway, and the key concepts, and you do the key concepts of several of the books of Seneca. How are you going to need to think of somebody else's house pretty soon if you're going to keep those in your head and learn something new? How have you found a limit? Like I can only keep so many texts in my head using this location before I start getting things jumbled. That's something I would be worried about if I tried to have 10 different books or concepts from different sources and use the same location. Does that work?
Yeah, now kind of yes and no, it depends. Now, the gist of this memory house, I've adapted a little bit. I wrote a book called Memorize the Faith in 2006, where I first laid out these particular rooms. So what's that? That's going on 16 years ago now. And usually when I give talks, I still use those same rooms, Okay. So I've given dozens of different talks on dozens of different topics using the exact same room.
Okay.
Now, sometimes, like when I recently did my first talks on these gifts of the Holy Spirit, they were a little bit more detailed, the first 2 that I talked about. So I actually used the first 2 rooms of the memory house for the first gift, which is called Wonder and Awe or Fear of the Lord. For the second one, I went back to my old memory car, that 1958 model. And I memorized the next one, the gift of reverence or piety, with the 20 parts of that car. So sometimes when you separate things out, it'll make it clearer. So I will say, if you have plenty of time between what you're trying to remember, like for me, like different various talks, and it might be a few months or so between, I can keep using those same rooms over and over and over and over.
Okay.
But if you were going to try to master several things around the same period of time, then you can use your own house. Like, I use what's basically patterned after my own house, though I also use the actual Stoa, the Stoic's porch in one part.
Sure.
Use a statue of Marcus Aurelius, a famous statue of him on a horse, in another part. But you can craft these from your own house. And what do you know better than your own house? So you can use this, or you can craft it. Now the book is illustrated, so it shows the pictures of this. So it'll help you form.
That helped. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, as you go through the book, I try to make it a fully guided tutorial. So I suggest all the locations and all the images, but I do point out, these images are kind of like what pops into my head when I read Epictetus.
Sure.
But images you form on your own might be even more powerful, right? Because there's some associations that you yourself form. And I believe you told about me one before we went on the air, and I really liked the way you personalized it.
Yeah. Well, you want to do an example of the first, the first 10 or first 5 or however many you want to do, just to give everyone an idea of what this is like?
Sure. And we can do this, however you.
We're approaching your house, the front door, and go inside. And if I'll start us off. I don't know how to approach. Right in front of us, in front of the doorway, is a cockpit for a jet fighter with 2 instrument panels, and that reminds us of several things, actually. James Stockdale, by the way, did he memorize word for word bits of the Enchiridion or the whole thing? Because I always hear he had it memorized, but I've never heard details on that.
See, now that I've read his books, but it's been a while. I actually don't know for sure, but I knew that he knew it so forward and backward that, he said, as his plane was coming down, he said, I'm leaving the world of civilization now. He said, probably for at least 5 years, I'm going to be living in the world of Epictetus. And I think it came out to almost 8. So I don't know if he could actually done it word for word, but it was, really at least a conceptual mastery. It was like his main handbook that he did have in his head that guided the way he lived his life.
Yeah.
And of course, it was incredibly beneficial for him to survive during those years as a POW, keeping himself strong and also helping the other prisoners stay strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's the cockpit with the two control panels reminding us of the dichotomy of control. Some things are in our power, some things are not. And then we turn to the welcome mat, as it were, as with in your example, you have you have the like a king with a crown, and the kind of like the guy from, what was was it Fantasy Island? Was that
Exactly.
the show? Deplane,
Exactly.
deplane, but he's saying desire, like the sire. Sometimes I think of, when I'm thinking of this, I think of two two dishes, one full of cookies and one full of worms. So desire and aversion, and I put the lid on the cookies because for now I must ignore desire.
Oh, that's great.
but then you remember what desire and aversion, and then you turn and look out the window behind you and see a child crying over a broken mug, and that reminds us of the next chapter, which is when something breaks, you can remind yourself that that's the nature of things. And then the hardest part to swallow, you kiss your child goodnight and remember they are mortal as well. And that kind of reminds us of that. And then we look back into the room. Do you want to do the next one? I don't want to ramble on. You're the guest and I'm the author.
Well, let's go every other one for a little bit. Yeah, now you're gonna go to the fourth location. And remember, every number here does correspond to this exact little paragraph or chapter within the
Enchiridion. Yeah.
Number 4, there's a portrait on the wall, and it shows an ancient Roman bath. And what's kind of strange about it is there's actual like Mr. Bubble. The bubbles are running down your wall. Okay, so it's going to remind you there of the Roman bath. And then this is the fourth chapter. Epictetus actually gives this example. He said, "Hey, remember when you go to a bath, there's going to people are going to be, they're going to jostle you. There might be sweaty, stinky people there. They might steal your clothes. You don't know what's going to happen." He said, so remember, remind yourself, you're not going there just to get a bath. You're also going there as a dignified person. You want to keep, you want to keep your honor. You want to live a virtuous life. So be prepared for things to go wrong, but don't let them upset you. Don't let them, act out in ways that aren't noble.
Right. We have two goals: to do what we're trying to do and to keep our Stoic cool. Those are our two goals, the premeditatio malorum.
Yeah, that's right. Looking forward to bad things and being ready for them.
Right, absolutely. And then we look over, and this is the gun rack, correct? I am not skipping one. With
right.
we see a gun rack, and Socrates is standing there, and instead of pulling firearms off the gun rack, he's pulling leaves out that have a letter B on them. And these are to remind us, and this that it's our beliefs that I'm trying to remember exactly how it's worded in the Enchiridion, but Socrates didn't think death was a bad thing. So we shouldn't believe it is either. That's the one thing I remember from that reading. If you want to flesh it out, you've been at this longer than I.
Sure. And the fifth one's a key one for me, because the modern cognitive therapists like Aaron Beck of cognitive therapy, the psychiatrist Albert Ellis of the rational emotive behavior therapy, they both kind of zoomed in on this statement. And in one translation goes, people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of things. Right. And other translations would say judgments, or you could use attitudes. Albert Ellis used the term beliefs. So those leaves with the B remind you beliefs. Belief is what is central. It's what you tell yourself about bad things, even things as bad as death, that make all the difference. And Socrates was a hero to the Stoics, but he was one who didn't even fear death. He decided his own death was for the public good, so he refused to be persuaded to sneak out of the jail or anything. So yeah, that basic concept there. At the fifth location, that beliefs are what's central to the Stoics.
It's the stories we tell ourselves that influence our attitudes a lot of times, right? Our beliefs about things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so now we look back into the room, and there's a horse now, right? You want to lead on?
Sure. I just have the image there. I got a horse in the middle of this foyer, and it's trampling on this mirror. Well, what's that all about? Well, within this little chapter, Epictetus talks about, well, when I say what later Christian writers would talk about, the sin or vice of vanity, and basically he's saying, don't go around bragging because you got a beautiful horse. I mean, the horse should be proud of that, not you, So he's saying basically, we should look and value the things that are really matter, the things that are fitting for a human being, and not be vain over external things or things that don't even, belong to us.
Right. And then up above the horse is a chandelier, and a ship sailing out of the chandelier. I think of a captain, standing there, and that's the interesting chapter from the Enchiridion, reminding us to be ready when the captain calls, not to wander too far from the ship. because we never know when the captain's going to call us home.
Exactly.
And then I think of waves rolling and smacking into the mirror over here where we're going next for the next chapter.
Yeah, in the mirror, if I recall, it had a birthday cake full of candles there.
Right.
And I said that I, like in modern language, in some ways the lesson is be careful what you wish for. But what Epictetus is saying, if you wish that whatever happens, then your wish is always granted, right?
Right.
So he's like a genie on steroids, So he's basically saying what, you as a Stoic, you're still going to act, you're going to try to achieve things, right? But you never know. You can do all the right things, and external things can prevent the outcome that you have in mind. All kinds of things can prevent you. So the main thing is you set goals, you try to do noble things, you make achievements. But if bad things happen, then you deal with that and you try to go on and learn from that. So in a sense, whatever happens, say, well, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to make use of this?
Yeah. And then we go down, and sitting there under the mirror is Master Yoda with his cane. And he said, well, is it prohoresis? Is that the pronunciation? Would you pronounce
Yeah, I think so. I mean, approximately,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
I
he's like,
pronounce it prohoresis.
Yeah, prohoresis it is. Something like that.
Oh,
right?
You do that so well.
And so he's reminding, I think of like him saying something like, you think my limp defines me, do you? Or something, like you think my disability defines me? No, it's just my leg. My leg is not me, and that's the idea that, so you are more than your body is essentially, kind of the idea here. It's all about your power of choice is the important thing to Epictetus. And please flesh it out. That's my simple Sunday Stoic understanding.
I love that. I love that. And I guess it never even fully occurred to me how Epictetus is Yoda himself,
right?
This wise mentor of a small, frail body. And when I'm going through here, to remind us of the key concept, okay, like 9. Okay, this 9 location. This is where he really brings prohoresis up front. So they go, how are we going to memorize a Greek word like prohoresis? So I just did kind of a verbal pun, because you imagine there's this hairy pro athlete sitting there, and Yoda. I'm not going to do the Yoda voice. You do that so well, but he just says basically, pro Harry he is.
Pro Harry.
Pro Harry's close enough.
Yeah, excellent. All right, and now we look, and I'm trying to remember the exact imagery. There's like a drawer that's opened, right? And out pops He-Man. For those of you who grew up in the 80s that are listening, you'll know that for sure. I have a hard time picturing you watching He-Man, but apparently you're familiar, Doctor.
Oh, I'll tell you, I grew up as an absolute Superman nut. I always love those type of guys.
Yeah.
Hercules. They used to have a Samson cartoon, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, wow.
Sinbad. A bunch of these guys. But
so he says this catchphrase, which is,
he turns from Prince. I used to watch him because I watched him with my son when he was little. My son loved it, so I didn't mind watching He-Man. But Prince Adam. He's in some crisis. He holds his sword aloft and says, by the power of Grayskull, I have the power. And this is the lesson where Epictetus tells us, remember all these powers you have, you see an enticing body, remember you have the power of self-control. You have something difficult to do, basically. Remember you have fortitude. You have somebody who's annoying you, or remember you have patience. So here's where Epictetus, he rarely talks about specific virtues. He talks more about this overall prohoresis, but this is one time where he's spelling out some virtues, because as Thomas Aquinas said, every virtue is a perfection of a power. And Epictetus said, hey, remember, you have all kinds of powers. If you take the time to develop them and practice them, you can pull them out and use them when you need them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as you said, we can then tweak these images to things that mean something. If you don't know who He-Man is, well, insert something else. That
exactly
gets you to the idea, and make it cartoony and strange, something that stands out, and you're much more likely to remember it. Then, of course, we would go on to the next room, to the returns counter, but we'll leave. I think y'all should buy the book to find out all of these locations and what they mean. But it does work. I was with it takes effort, but with minimal effort from my perspective. I would revisit it and slowly work my way through 10 at a time. And within a week, I was pretty much through the Enchiridion. And able to, I supplemented a few. For example, later on when we're in The dining room. There's an example of a slave beating two mugs together, if you recall, reminding us of one of the chapters. And maybe I screwed this up, but I put a slave and a rich person toasting, and both their mugs break, but the rich guy only sees the slave's mugs break, and he laughs until he looks at his own mug, and then he cries. But what he needs to be doing is realizing, if you see it happen to someone else, it's easy for you to say, this is the way things go. But when it happens to you, you need to remember the same thing.
That's a far better image. that gives the message much clearer. So that's exactly what I hope people will do with these two. You flesh it out, make it meaningful to you, and there's probably a fair chance you're going to do a better image than the one that's in the book, or one that will be better for you, at least. It has more,
for you. Yeah,
what resonates with you will lock it in.
Yeah, and then when what I like about it, and I find powerful about this, is if you're riding the bus, if you're waiting in line, if you are bored, this is something that is far more, in my mind, what's the word I want? I want to say wholesome, but I don't think that's the right word. But rather than pulling out your phone and looking at the news or doom scrolling, as they say, you can just say, well, I'm just going to go through and recall the first 10 chapters of Epictetus while I wait in line here, or do something along. Remember what the core themes of Marcus Aurelius were, so on and so forth. And it's a way to put your mind to work instead of just letting other people fill your mind with stuff. You can make use of what you want to think about, rather than be force-fed ads and everything else that would happen if you pulled out that phone in your pocket.
Yeah, you reminded me, Steve, of our second lesson of the desire, the discipline to desire, in a way. Yeah, I'm going to sit here and it'd be very tempting just to watch TV or scroll through my phone, but maybe I'm going to rein myself in a little bit, take some time to think more like a Stoic, to ruminate a bit on these things that we've learned. And I should say in the book, there's kind of 3 parts to each chapter. I do the little memory tour. Then I give you the summary itself from Epictetus or Seneca or Aurelius. And then I have some commentary,
Yeah.
So I try to say, like, what some other commentators on Epictetus had to say, or what later thinkers, they might be Christian thinkers, they might be psychotherapists, So try to flesh it out and give people more to chew on than just, my memory.
There's a lot of material here around those individual, it sounds like we just threw out one-liners, but about each chapter, but you have a lot of in-depth, as you said, information, commentary, what others have said throughout the ages about that quote or that bit of text. There's a lot of information in this work, and I recommend folks check it out. And once again, it's Memorize the Stoics, the ancient art of memory meets the timeless art of living. And if you like that, and especially maybe anyone would find this interesting, but especially if you happen to be Catholic as well, you have a lot of other books on memory, that, like the Latin Mass, I believe, and just the Mass in general. And I how many memory books do you have?
This is the 5th. There's one called Memorize the Faith, 10 Commandments, all the books of the Bible, stuff like that. One called Memorize the Reasons. It's for like apologetics, why Catholics believe what they do. Then there's Memorize the Mass, the main parts of the Mass, and Memorize the Latin Mass. And then now we have Memorize the Stoics.
Wow. Well, that's great. That's great. And I think it's very powerful. And it feels like maybe you're connecting to the ancients in a way, something that they would have done that a lot of us have forgotten about, but it's very powerful. It kind of makes you feel part of the continuum, like picking up a skill that used to be quite important and taught quite a lot, but that we have often forgotten about, except for that quarter book you found at a book sale.
Yeah, and I hope so. With those ancient roots, we do know that Seneca's father was a memory master. He did prodigious, amazing things, and there's some speculation to what extent Seneca himself may also have been. He's often mentioned in modern books of the history of memory methods. So.
That's great. And if folks want to find out more about you, you have a website, www.drvost.com, drvost.com. And do you have any and can you give us a preview of any of those 5 books that are in the works? What kind of things are you working on?
They're kind of a broad range. One is Thomas Aquinas book on the first part of the Summa Theologica. It's called What is God? They said when he was 5 years old, he went to this monastery and he wouldn't stop asking the monk, what is God? What is God? What is God? And the way he spent the rest of his life trying to figure it out. So this This goes through his Summa, tells us what he had to say about the attributes of God, not just his proofs, but what is God like? What does it mean to say he's simple or he's all knowing and stuff like that? And then another one is called You Are That Temple. And it's actually a health and faith and fitness book. My other passion has been weightlifting all my life. And that's another one that will be coming out this summer. You Are That Temple.
Wow, that's great. Well, we'll look forward to those. And I once again do recommend this text. I've not read a book like this really for maybe ever. It's philosophy, but it's also literally a practice, a technique, a concrete practice that I think it could tie into other practices like premeditatio malorum and things. Is actually discipline. It's a form of discipline. I'm going to learn this or memorize this, and it takes work, especially if you're starting from scratch and coming up with your own cartoony images and trying to put it all together. But the results, I'm just impressed because it worked for me, and the proof is in the pudding, as they say. It works, and it's a very cool technique and a very good read. And I appreciate you sharing it with us on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And everyone, make sure to check out his website. I'll put a link to the book in the show description. And until next time, don't forget to seize the day. Carpe diem.